Okay, this one's off the cuff as usual, and for some reason I got 13 minutes on the dock. I usually have 20 minutes on the memory, but I need to go back and see what the phone is really, where the technology is at. Because where the technology is at, that's like it's kind of subjective, because we're all at different points in our life, and the different points we're at our life, it automatically coordinates in regardless of if you're taking the longevity into account. It coordinates like where we are as a soul, because the soul is the foundation. So the soul is the foundation. Are you guys all right? Beautiful people, beautiful people. So since the soul is the foundation, the slowed down, consolidated, solidified, slower post density is Earth, which is quote unquote less real, end quote, but still kind of within its own mutable esoteric discrepancies. It's it's refined in a different, it's refined in a different accord. So the topic of this video right here is just seeing like the casual comparison between Vedic astrology, the Earth astrology, and the, I guess, whatever draconian astrology is ultimately bridging with someone else's creations respectively, because the ancient galactic astrology, that's what we're building off of and coming to remember respectively, however you want to code it, however you want to identify it, however you want to represent it, however you want to realize it. It's for the shared learning of it, the ancient galactic astrology respectively. So I feel like the draconian astrology, aka slash the ancient galactic astrology respectively, is the birther to what we could call as, micro ancient SideReal, and how like within the last, from a bottom up level, from the last, like, however you want to like really incrementalize it, meaning like 25,000 years ago, 24,000 years ago, and those number shifts are based on the different markers of transition, and how like the spirit has been like kind of codified for a material purpose, because you can see the even numbers to the odd numbers, like, why is that? Because there's a natural way of a Fibonacci sequence and different expressions coming to be like kind of structuralized to like the early ancient quote unquote Metatronic codings, end quote, and that revolves around like all that which is materially coded. So like maybe like the sidereal astrology was an ancient astrology where the constellations and the houses and the planets themselves were more kind of like interjoined and early off, coming from a natural spread, and then it having its own time span of an evolution of how eventually things evolve over time, like Pangea. Whoever know, like, just as an example, over time Pangea became many different countries and expressions. Same with how like the astrology could have started somewhere quote unquote sidereal, and then the sidereal could have been dispersed in different ways where it's not necessarily like kind of like credibly evident anymore per se, from like our newly found present now time of bottom up, Earth astrology, tropical astrology, which I'm looking at tropical astrology as the Earth pretty much, like the Earth and the Sun's like direct relationship and their significant orbits around where, like, how they're traveling through the different spectrums of suns respectively, because that's all ultimately what it would be. But like we're trying to understand the different lens that us humans are getting affected from these astrologies, because I'm not trying to like debunk sidereal at all. I'm just trying to see like how it's like how it could like possibly be like it possibly could not be up to date, within, as far as like how we're how we're just identifying the movements, and how if there's a misidentifications of certain movements and transitions, we could lose the meaning based on what we're actually pointing to as far as an energy we're writing in, because what could also be going on other than how we're perceiving it is how like so to bring it back for a little bit, you would have to ask like the casual different contexts of the constellations themselves. Well, from if we're doing a casual draconian astrology, which is like ancient galactic astrology, then it would be from the sun's perception, right? So if it's from the sun's perception, the houses and the constellations were birthed from that originally, where SideReal could have started, and SideReal obviously recording things around the ecliptical axis of how more or less the Earth is having its own orbit, or having its own travel around an axis, or the sun having a travel around a different axis respectively, because that's the thing, that's the moving things that could be taken into account of. But we're failing to realize like what could ultimately like be projecting the illusion of it, the material, the material documentation and the reviewing in between the sun and the earth on a different context level could be an ancient Saturn, because the Saturn has like one of the aspects of Saturn, the microphysical body not being the micro multidimensional body, which the families of the earth are, all the families of the earth are different genetics and DNAs of all the different planets, and how all the planets have a micro physical aspect and a spiritual aspect of themselves, and then a base, the planet. And then same with the spiritually, all the planets have like a macro spiritual aspect, a macro physical aspect, and then a macro base aspect. And that macro physical aspect is a different like multidimensional being on a different galaxy respectively, that we're having faint correspondences with. So I just kind of explained the essence of the planets, and from their vantage points and standpoints, they're ultimately viewing astrology through the sun, because the sun is the stargate itself, and how they're peering through everything. So like before SideReal astrology, or synonymously parallel to SideReal astrology, was the ancient draconian galactic astrology respectively, and within that those have moved to be kind of something else for what they are today. Draconian astrology evolving to different, amplitudes and expressions of galactic astrology, and then tropical astrology being a different dispersion of quote unquote SideReal astrology. So within that, we're being affected by the modern bottom up astrology and the modern top down astrology. And our sun and our soul is a different type of, it's the light subconsciousness as opposed to the dark subconsciousness. And that light subconsciousness is how the galactic astrology is moving and having a new relationship with the physical galactical field, is having a new relationship with the material planetary field. And within that, our body is mutating and according to those movements in itself. So as they're mutating to those movements in themselves, we're seeing we're seeing how tropical astrology is it's relevant to seeing the constellations in the context of how they're shifted in a new way on the presupposition and on the basis that there's a quote unquote fixed coordinate system of how the sun, Saturn, and Earth is on a material level, kind of like having a fixed travel within the material object spaceship within the macro infrastructure of all things, because Bhumandala is the macro infrastructure of everything. And so this macro infrastructure always was. So what the material astrology, any astrology respectively, per your pure refined perception, is we're moving through a certain junction within the macro infrastructure to micro infrastructure, both pertaining to the physical attribute aspects of them. And we're seeing where there has been a pre-programming from different vantage points of how from galactic astrology and tropical astrology to modern astrologies, we're seeing how different things are viewing from the sun and having an expression, infusing the sun so other things could be expressed through that sun. And then the tropical astrology, us being on Earth from a certain fixed coordinates of how we're seeing the houses being in a certain position from the sun on a seasonal level, on a different natural pattern fixed level, on a natural fixed level. And we're seeing, rather than kind of dwelling on that which has passed, because you could say tropical astrology is a chain reaction domino effect to what sidereal used to be, because like there's kind of like a trigger point where the houses are always orbiting as the houses, but within the houses or always orbiting as the houses, eventually the constellations were born from the houses. So now there's two different particular contexts of orbits in regards to the material orbit from Earth and the sun. And those two things, we're just what we're relevantizing now from tropical astrology is how we're moving from how the constellations were born in between from the Earth and the sun, and how the houses are still a relevant thing. And they're also on a different higher yin macro orbit, kind of in like above the sun perhaps in one context, but just on a different junction point. But there's it's still relevant, sidereal astrology is still relevant because it's moving, but it's moving from a different accord. But you got to ask, like, from what vantage point? And from, if we're looking at sidereal Earth from the Earth vantage point, it could be outdated because the constellations are in between, and those are more so affecting us from how we're materially perceiving the material constellations to be. And the material constellations are different contexts from our material Earth to the material sun on the physical plane level. Their spaces occupied, and they have certain codes you could call quote unquote satellites end quote, but the constellations aren't just that, because the constellations could have a dream body. So tropical astrology is taking into account like how the Earth is being impacted from the constellations it's moving and orbiting with the sun around both of their ecliptical axes, and the sidereal being like the past, how the houses are their own thing in their entire different entity, and from an Earth Western point of view, from how, like, how the Western point of view on a trick level is also taking into account where how Saturn is programming everything, because on an ancient level, sidereal actually orbits around Saturn simultaneously in between Saturn and the sun, and the houses that were created, because the houses got ultimately created and identified from ancient Saturn being an ancient programmer and a documenter of all things, because we were orbiting around that, like, we've always, in a different context, we're still orbiting around Saturn, because that's the Maya itself. It's the matrix itself. Saturn is the matrix itself. And my Instagram is like pops off way harder too. But this is just an introduction. My memory is like, I don't know why my memory is like this. I only have 25 seconds. But yeah, best to you guys. 15 seconds. Um, and yeah, Earth just kind of being in a new space.